my fellow freedom loving sovereign thinkers. This is L3's News Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful Swampy Mango, South Florida. And today's date is Friday, May 31st, 2019. So let us begin. Ooh, hey friends, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I'm just a little bit relaxed and doing my thing and all that good stuff. Hopefully everyone's having a good week. Yes, and I am at Stash, located at 109 Southwest 2nd Avenue in the heart of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the Himmershey District to be exact, which is a jam set with Revolution Live and America's Backyard. You might hear some music in the background now and then, which is okay. Pretty quiet right now in this facility. Yeah, so I'm just reviewed my last episode about the anti-Semitism bill. I noticed spoken a little bit too fast, and I apologize for it. These days, it just really dawns on me. When you have individuals at times believe they're smarter than their supreme law of the state of Florida, etc. And like I said before, I'm not here to condemn Israel or people who are Jewish, etc. When it comes to bias and something like in anything that pertaining to weaken our natural born rights, that's when I call folks out. And don't get me wrong, even Governor DeSantis, there's times I will commend him. There's times I am critical. And even when I was thinking about when I did the podcast around August, end of August, when Gillum and DeSantis were the top two dogs, I would say. That will be in the governor's race, the finals, they call it. And in that title, Don't Believe the Hype. And I explained why about both candidates. They're considered pro-establishment. I know, and this time, yeah, I'll take those chances. Some of them may not like it, which is okay. But in due time, they realize, hey, he was right. And it's not tooting my horn or trying to get brownie points. That's why the main objective is this. When it comes to government, you have to be vigilant, period. And what I've seen about this particular now bill into law, signed on foreign soil, I do see this unethical, and everyone that participated in it, the cabinet members, etc., breached their oath of office under Article 2, Section 5 of our state constitution. No exceptions, no defense. I made a comment on a couple of the Tampa Bay Times and Florida politics on a statement I made, which I addressed yesterday. I'm going to have to check it in, see how many people will respond. They can't call me names. Proves they have no merit. Regardless who's in there, it's the person, not the party. It's cute because what I've done, it made a meme. Made a meme on this. Ron DeSantis speaking. It says here, Florida's new motto shall be named, In Israel We Trust. Get rid of God and say, In Israel We Trust. So, and it's not out of malice or animosity, but rather in good faith. If DeSantis says to me, Governor DeSantis, you put that meme up, I go, yes, I did, sir. Because you chose poorly. And that's how it goes. He can reconsider. You can repent for his actions. No one we never should be owned by anyone, especially foreign nation or foreign government. Article 1, Section 1 of the Florida Constitution made that clear. It's the people of Florida, not a nation 6,000 miles away, or the government. That's how I look at it. Some may not like it. And I'm not saying if you go and attack people that are from a particular creed or national background, it is free speech. Egregious is disallowed. Violate them, make physical threats, physical harm, even going in their homes, property, etc. That's when you draw the line on that matter. But if you're going to be critical, Holocaust deniers and all that, hey, there's multiple genocides and democides were considered holocausts. Not just what happened in Nazi-occupied Europe. So always got to look at the bigger picture. Even the late great Aaron Zellman was the founder for Jews, one of the founders for the Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, did a book, Death by Gun Control. Some of you may have heard it before, but I'll repeat it again. On that chapter about Nazi-occupied Europe, he put it in bold print a few times in that chapter. It wasn't just the Jews. It was everyone else. And I have to commend them for that. Always paid eternal homage for men and individuals, including women, on valued principles. Enough with the ranting. I'm just trying to see what I wanted to talk about. So I just do one more thing, another thing here on Julian Assange. I know many folks will look at this as a psyop, but Consortium News did a report on this, and this is entitled UN Torture Report, Demonized Assange has faced psychological torture. UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has blasted 4 nations for imposing psychological torture on Julian Assange. A relentless and unrestrained campaign of public mobbing, intimidation, and defamation warns of criminalization of journalism. By Joe Loria, which is really good. It says here the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has issued stinging rebuke to the United States, Great Britain, Sweden, and Ecuador for deliberately exposing WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange for 2 years of cruel or inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment, which can only be described as psychological torture. In 20 years of work with victims of war, violence, and political persecution, I've never seen a group of democratic states ganging up to deliberately isolate, demonize, and abuse a single individual for such a long time, and with so little regard for human dignity and the rule of law. Nils Melzer said in a statement published in the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights website on Friday, the collective persecution on Julian Assange must end here and now. The evidence is overwhelming and clear, Melzer said. Mr. Assange has been deliberately exposed for a period of several years to progressively severe forms of cruel, inhuman, or degraded treatment or punishment, the cumulative effects of which can only be described as psychological torture. Melzer went on, in the course of the period of the past 9 years, Mr. Assange has been exposed to persistent, progressively severe abuse, ranging from systematic judicial persecution, and arbitrary confinement in the Ecuadorian embassy, to his oppressive isolation, harassment, and surveillance inside the embassy and from deliberate collective ridicule, insults, and humiliation to open instigation of violence and even repeated calls for his assassination. That's true. And all those vindictive parasites, you know who you are nothing more than Palmolive's cowards and wussies. I will proceed. Meltzer visited Assange at Belmarsh Prison in London on May 9th with two doctors expert in recognizing potential torture victims who examined WikiLeaks founder. Meltzer's statement makes no mention of Assange having been hospitalized in the prison after he was unable to converse with his Swedish lawyer. Meltzer said it was obvious that Mr. Assange's health had been seriously affected by the extremely hostile and arbitrary environment he has been exposed to for many years. Most importantly, in addition to physical ailments, Mr. Assange showed all symptoms typical for prolonged exposure to psychological torture, including extreme stress, chronic anxiety, and intense psychological trauma. Fears possible torture in the U.S. UN rapporteur said Assange's human rights could be further threatened with extradition to the United States to face 18 charges, including 17 under the Espionage Act. My most urgent concern is that in the United States, Mr. Assange will be exposed to a real risk of serious violations of his human rights, including his freedom of expression, his right to a fair trial, and the prohibition of torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, said Meltzer. He said he was particularly alarmed by the Espionage Act charges. This will result in a life sentence without parole or possibly even the death penalty if further charges were to be added in the future, said Meltzer. The rapporteur expressed deep concern that the Trump administration is criminalizing journalism. Since 2010, when WikiLeaks started publishing evidence of war crimes and torture committed by U.S. forces, we've seen a sustained and concerted effort by several states toward getting Mr. Assange extradited to the United States for prosecution, raising serious concerns over the criminalization of investigative journalism in violation of both the U.S. Constitution and international human rights law, the rapporteur said. The Sydney Morning Herald, quoting from a confidential report that Meltzer sent to the British government on Monday, as well as from an interview the rapporteur reported. Assange is really something I've never seen in 20 years, Meltzer said. I've seen atrocities in war areas that were physically more horrible, but I've never seen a single person pursued so relentlessly and with so little foundation. When I saw him, I immediately compared him to some of the graver cases in interrogation prisons in terms of his psychological reaction patterns. That's what alarmed me so much. He said Assange's treatment was very close to the intentional, purposeful infliction of coercive measures trying to break him. He appeared extremely agitated and preoccupied, Meltzer said. He asked a lot of questions and he would jump around. He was so preoccupied with everything he can't even compute my answers anymore. There were episodes of this, then he was part of the conversation as normal, then again he would enter into his agitated state. I never seen with other victims of psychological torture that would happen. Meltzer blasted the government of Assange's native Australia. He told the newspaper Australia's glaring absence in this case. They're not just around as if Assange was not an Australian citizen. That is not the correct way of dealing with that. A spokesperson for the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade told the Herald, "We reject any suggestion by the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture that the Australian government is complicit in psychological torture or has shown lack of counsel support for Mr. Assange." Britain's Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt condemned Meltzer for his report. Hunt said it was wrong for the UN rapporteur to interfere with British justice by uttering inflammatory accusations. And it's interesting right here, you can see it right here on his Twitter page. And it says here, Nils Meltzer, he replied to Hunt, "With all due respect, sir, Mr. Assange was about as free to leave as someone sitting on rubber boat in a chart pool, as detained in my formal letter to you. So far, UK courts have not shown the impartiality and objectivity required by the rule of law. And it's true. That's why I say the war on the press continues worldwide. Supposed to be some torture. It's supposed to be an online report, 4 p.m. Eastern time. You can probably go on Consortium News and see it for yourself. It is very disturbing, folks. Like I said, some people claim he's an arrogant individual. And it's not just Assange. It's freedom of the press. And now you could say, if the United States is going to extradite him for espionage, nothing more than one big sack of pus. And I talked about his charges in my past episodes. How I felt about John Demmer. Claimed Assange is not a journalist. And I said, you're not an attorney. So we always got to look at these areas. If this pursues, who's going to be next? Even Judge Napolitano said he has the right to free. He has rights, and he needs to be let go. Hey, I oppose extradition. Period. Everyone in the House, everyone in Congress should say no. We got a bunch of cockroaches in there as well, in the District of Criminals. And I say that conservatively. This is disturbing and unacceptable. But in due time, it will blow back in those tyrants' faces. Hands off Assange, hands off the press, and hands off our Bill of Rights and freedom of the press worldwide. All right, next one here came out to the public yesterday by American Free Press. I subscribe to it. They got some good articles. It's pretty cool because they're nonpartisan too. So, this here, white rights get radio host fired, and this is by John Friend. Interesting here, Georgia Peach got the boot from a conservative-leaning AM radio station in California after acknowledging that white genocide is for real. Apparently, the discussion of white rights is just too politically incorrect for some to stomach. And this is what John Friend has to say. And yet another indication that political correctness is stifling free speech in the First Amendment in America. An outspoken conservative local talk radio host was terminated recently as a direct result from her controversial political views. The Georgia Peach was one of the most popular hosts on KSCO, a low conservative-leaning AM radio station headquartered in Santa Cruz, California, one of the most liberal cities in one of the most liberal states in America. Georgia, who had hosted in a live 2-hour open phones program twice per week on KSCO for years, was recently fired by the station owner. Georgia was known for politically incorrect views and passionate defense of whites in America and around the world, who she views as under attack culturally and demographically. My firing had all to do with my speaking for white Europeans, Georgia explained to this reporter in a recent interview. The minute that started, I became a target. Georgia had highlighted some of the issues she was most concerned with during the interview. The issues I'm most passionate about are my pride and what our people have created, not just for America, but for Western civilization, Georgia said. I want us to have the right to continue to exist. I'm deeply concerned about losing our civil rights. Whites no longer have civil rights in their own homeland. We no longer have a homeland of our own. We have two-tiered justice system, one for us and one for non-whites. I am passionate about preserving our history. I am passionate about setting the record straight about our history. And it's interesting there because I could say there's a lot of merit behind that too. It's just an example of what tyranny is about. political tyranny to be sure. We'll target this group, target that group, target this particular creed. It's been going on for a very long time, my friend. It's a little oppressive hot potato game, you can call it. I will proceed. Georgia has also become increasingly focused on what she described as white genocide, a topic she elaborated during an interview with his reporter. White genocide is for real, she noted. When I used those words on AM radio, people were shocked and confused. I spoke about the Colorly Plan. I explained how the slow ethno-cleansing of our people, which would lead to the genocide of us. People started to catch on and get it. They started using those words, which meant my message was effective. Georgia has always been a conservative-leaning presenter on KSCO, which featured local broadcasters in the Santa Cruz area with a wide range of political views and interests, along with more mainstream nationally syndicated talk show hosts such as Rush Limbaugh and George Noory, who host a popular coast-to-coast program focusing on paranormal activities and other controversial topics. Over time, however, Georgia became more focused on what she described as white genocide and systematic discrimination against white Americans, and she was not afraid to speak out in the opposition to it. As she gained more and more popularity and notoriety in her critics' eyes, she became a target of radical left-wing journalists and Antifa activists, ultimately resulting her recent termination by station management. The official explanation was they wanted to go in a different direction. In other words, no real talk radio, but moderate, pablum talk to keep everyone dumbed down and asleep. Ain't that typical or what? Georgia explained, as long as I stayed on mainstream conservative talking points without touching the real issues behind the destruction of our country, of our people, I was okay. There were no complaints or attacks. However, as I became more and more vocal, my audience began to grow, and they began to speak up. If I had given them a safe platform to do so, that's when the witch hunt and the agenda to find a way to get rid of the most popular shows on KCSO began. Local journalists began targeting her for focusing on the topic of white genocide and other racial issues, which she became increasingly passionate about. There are all kinds of attacks, campaigns, petitions to pressure the station to fire me, Georgia said. It was ongoing with many newspaper articles. It was an all-out attack with only one purpose, which was to silence me. Ultimately, the pressure proved to be successful, and Georgia is no longer with the station, although she was one of the most popular hosts on the entire network. Her show host page on the KCSO website was removed, along with all her archive programs. She had even helped the station raise money to fund the network, only to be fired after having successfully raised roughly $8,000, according to Georgia. The owner of the radio station did an editorial asking people to donate my show. Georgia noted, he took the money and killed my show. Despite the setbacks, Georgia is determined to continue speaking out on these other controversial topics. She recently appeared on the Jeff Renz program, one of the most popular and long-running alternative media programs in America. No doubt Georgia will be back on the air soon, more focused and determined than ever. As for my future, who knows? Georgia concluded. One door closes, another one opens. Good stroke of confidence, indeed. I remember from people, certain individuals, separatist groups and so forth, racial separatist groups, so forth, Euro separatist groups, Nazis and so forth, do talk about European genocide, white genocide. And I could say I am not going to hammer them for it, to condemn. There's a lot of merit behind it. Even if you look at the Soviet gulags, it has happened. A lot of white Europeans were slaughtered. Millions of them. Okay, that's just an example. Even the Romanians, by the Turkish, by the crumbling Ottoman Empire, the Pasha regime. All right, it's just an example of what's been going on. Democide and genocide across the board should be condemned. Period. And what Georgia Peach did, just address a concerned example. If one group of rights gets taken away, it becomes a domino effect. And that's the truth. like it or not. You talk to a guy who's part Spanish too, part Hispanic, Puerto Rican Spanish, Hungarian, French, and Finnish. So I always use natural rights. We all have them. Doesn't matter what you look like. I always talk to my fellow brothers and sisters about that worldwide, regardless. If they can censor her, you could be next. And this is why we gotta protect everyone's free speech, including our enemies. Thomas Paine made that clear. If you don't support their liberties, yours can be next. I'm just paraphrasing. Make sure you always check out AmericanFreePress.net. They got some good articles and they got some good interviews as well on YouTube. Just check it out. Doesn't matter what you look like. Hey, at least they're the only they're the only newspaper that actually endorsed Ron Paul for president twice, which is awesome. So next one here. This came from Bob Livingston Alerts, which is a Personal Liberty Media Group. It says here, globalists only need one major event to finish crashing the economy. As a brand has been to say, as I predicted in my article, Trump's trade war was a perfect smokescreen for a market crash, published in March 2018, as well as my article, The Trade War Distraction, Howey and the Linchpin Theory, published in December 2018. The U.S.-China trade dispute has escalated into an all-out war with no end in sight. The claims of many analysts and skeptics a year ago that the trade war would be over quickly and that China would fold to U.S. tariffs has been proven incorrect. The reason why these analysts got it so wrong centers primarily on their misunderstanding the true purpose behind the event. The global war is not a balance to the U.S. trade deficit or pursue more circumstances for U.S. exports and imports. The intention of the Trump administration is not to fight back against Chinese exploitation of U.S. markets, nor is Trump's intention to undermine global structures and agreements in order to bring back American manufacturing, a carrot held out to Americans for a long time to lure into supporting destructive policies such as the dollar devaluation. On the contrary, the real purpose of Trump's trade war is to provide a distraction massive enough to cover for the controlled demolition of the U.S. economy and parts of the global economy by globalists and central banks. The tariff soap opera and most of Trump's foreign and domestic policies are eerily similar to those of Herbert Hoover just before the advent of the Great Depression. There's probably not a coincidence. The narrative for an economic collapse rivaling that one of the Great Depression has been set, and the root circumstances are very similar. Since the crash in 2008, the U.S. has been suffering a slow, grinding decline in fundamentals. The collapse of an empire often takes time. The response of central banks has been slow to crash using stimulus measures and near zero interest rates. But this strategy was not meant to reverse U.S. economic decline. The purpose of the QE was meant to inflate an even larger bubble than before, one that would encompass every aspect of the economy, including the dollar. A bubble that, when popped, would devastate the U.S. specifically and create panic around the world. Now, the stimulus phase of the global agenda is over. The U.S. M2 money supply growth has been decelerating and now hovers near 10-year lows, while stimulus measures have evaporated in most countries except China. Global dollar liquidity has been dwindling as the Federal Reserve continues to cut its balance sheet unabated. This would explain why the U.S. equities are struggling to stay afloat despite the fact that corporate buybacks of stocks have increased the historic high. In 2019, central banks, most importantly the Fed, are no longer popping up the system. The life support plug has been pulled, and parts of the economy that have been dependent are taking their last breaths. The trade war situation is now not enough of a distraction in my view, however. At least one major event with global ramifications or perceived global ramifications is indeed by the elites. before they can implode the everything bubble without taking the blame for the consequences. You say that? Entrapment. Find a scapegoat. Trade war shock and awe. There are several powder kegs that exist today that would serve the purpose of occupying the minds of the masses while the globalists finalize the crash. As noted, I predict the trade war as it stands will continue to accelerate unabated until the plunge in fundamentals and equities is complete. We haven't seen anything yet as far as trade war chaos. The U.S.-China trade conflict has the potential to become an economic world war, with multiple countries beginning to take sides. Japan and the UK have opted to support U.S. interests, which is not surprising since China and Japan have hated each other for generations, and the U.S. is the UK's strongest economic partner in the wake of Brexit. Already, some people are declaring this to mean that the U.S. will gain the majority of global support and crush China. But keep in mind, as I outlined in evidence in my recent article, America will lose the trade war because that's what the globalists want to happen. The trade war is a farce on both sides of the Pacific, as both China and the U.S. are controlled by the same financial power centers, like the Bank for International Settlements. As the scenario moves forward, I believe many analysts will find themselves shocked as more and more nations start taking China's side in the conflict. The more powerful option China has at its disposal is dumping the U.S. Treasury and the dollar as a world reserve currency. China has established a very close economic ties with key nations over the past decade, including Russia, Germany, India, Australia, and even Saudi Arabia. Don't be surprised if not all these nations support China in the trade war. China has yet to fully retaliate against the latest increase in U.S. tariffs. When it does, the attacks will be larger than cutting off purchases of U.S. agricultural goods. The next escalation could be the trigger that sends the crash into overdrive. Yeah, so it's all this. You always got the big banksters, the Rothschilds, and all that are pulling the strings, folks. And even the people in China should know this as well, which I know many of them have and are seeing it as well. Iran war looming. With war with Iran at this time makes no sense whatsoever unless you look at it from a globalist perspective. The globalists are the only group that stands to gain from such a catastrophe as war with Iran will seal the fate of the U.S. economy. The most immediate threat will be a potential shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran, which would take nothing more than sinking a few large cargo vessels along the narrow and more shallow portions of the strait, placing minefields on staging anti-ship missiles within striking range. The subsequent explosion in oil prices will be devastating to the global economy and the U.S. economy in particular. In the longer term, complete destabilization of the Middle East would result beyond what we have already seen, and the cost of the taxpayers as well as the cost of American lives would be high. Beyond this, the distraction would be epic and very effective. This event, coupled with the trade war, would fulfill the globalist narrative that the Trump administration and the conservatives that support him are a menace to global stability. Any financial crash at that point would undoubtedly be blamed on Trump as well as his supporters. Like I said, they'll blame it on them. It's more of the scapegoat game. And don't get me wrong, folks, I'm not a Trump worshiper. Okay, so just giving you that rundown to see things observing the bigger picture. Currently, the mainstream media is very quiet on the Iran situation despite the sudden shift of U.S. military resources to the region, which leads me to believe that the conflict is being planned in the near term. So expect this, folks, okay? This is what the one world order wants. Brexit finalized. This event may not be concluded until the end of this year, but I'm still maintaining, as I always have, that the Brexit is a staged distraction that will be exploited by globalists. The rise of populists in Europe and the U.S. at the exact same time that central banks began withdrawing liquidity, and at the exact time the fundamentals began to plummet, is no coincidence. I believe Brexit will conclude that the UK will indeed leave the EU. The latest announcement of Theresa May's resignation seemed to indicate that this will be the case. Sovereignty activists will cheer the outcome, and then things will start to go horribly wrong. The European markets will tank, and major banks will announce insolvency. The panic felt in 2008 will return and hit the EU and the UK hard, and the Brexit movement will get blamed while central banks escape any culpability. The only one of these events is needed to initiate the next stage of economic collapse, but it is likely we will see all three occur in due course. While the current crash started at the end of 2018, the year of 2019 will probably be the one that is most remembered as the beginning of the Great Depression 2.0. So, folks, always got to look at the bigger picture on these matters. Be vigilant, be ready, work locally. I see people trying to see some of these towns will be mega cities, very treacherous. Agriculture should be the key. Off the grid, that'd be good to know. Never try to leave all your eggs in one basket. And always correspond with your fellow neighbors, because you never know. They have some great gifts, and you do have different great attributes. Gel together, because that's how things has to be. And now, with more people living in the big cities, the Great Depression could be a lot worse. I'm talking about globally. Look, we see what happened in Greece, in Italy, a few other countries being financial collapses. Yeah, the IMF, the World Bank, they're very good at these things. Blame it on the political figureheads, and they wash their hands. The Pontius Pilate of economics. Always got to prepare yourselves, folks. We should end all these wars. Bring all of our brothers and sisters home. And if these clowns want to go to war, throw them on the front line. Let's see how tough they are. All right. All right. So we got one more here, my friends, and it's from Mises.org. I always enjoy reading their input here. And it says here, digital cash, another dangerous new idea in monetary policy. Came out yesterday by Christopher Malzin-Hassan. While modern monetary theory has provided some distraction for public and commentators alike, war on cash goes on. In the latest issue of the Cato Journal, the distinguished economic historian Michael Bardo and his co-author Andrew Levin lament the failure of the experiments of unconventional monetary policies to the last decade to stimulate aggregate demand. While they detail these failures at length, they do not draw a conclusion that there is something fundamentally wrong with the dominant approach to monetary policy. Rather, the problem is that the effective lower bound (ELB) on nominal interest rates has prevented central banks from providing sufficient monetary stimulus. After all, cash is interest-free, so zero or negative interest rates cannot be imposed on the economy, as people will simply shift their savings from bank accounts into cash holdings. Clearly, something must be done to overcome this problem. It has been long recognized, e.g. by Professor Salerno, that one of the main motives in the war on cash is to overcome the ELB. Eliminate cash, and there will be no limit to how low the Federal Reserve can go. Professors Bordeaux and Levin did not wish to go that far, at least initially. Rather, they suggest that digital cash be established as a fulcrum of U.S. monetary policy, U.S. monetary system. That's page 384. Their scheme briefly is as follows: digital cash should be provided in designated accounts as supervised depository institutions, in which term would hold part of all these funds in reserve accounts at the central bank. The digital cash accounts would also earn an interest that this interest rate would become the central bank's main policy tool. Hopefully you're okay out there. In normal times, it would be positive, but in times of crisis, the central bank would be able to cut the rate below zero, reassured by the good professors that individuals and firms will still be free to use physical cash. It's just digital cash will be so dang inconvenient, and that demand for physical cash will rapidly disappear. But just to make sure, fees should be imposed on transfers from digital to physical cash, so there are no incentives to arbitrage. In the case of negative interest rates on digital cash, there's a lot to criticize in this proposal. Its totalitarian implications. It is similar to Rogoff's book, The Curse on Cash, which they cite improvingly. It is also extremely one-sided. For instance, a token-based system of digital cash, think Bitcoin, is portrayed as prone to fraud. But we are led to believe that no such problem exists when it comes to the favored form of digital cash. Their assurance that private individuals will not have to pay negative interest rates ring hollow. For once, everybody is in the system, but it's to stop the benevolent central bank from changing the rules on who is and who is exempt from the negative rates. One, fees on transfer between digital and physical cash is in place. Why not make physical cash prohibitively expensive? Ultimately, the public is forced to use the financial system. Negative interest rates are imposed as thoughts necessary by the central bank, and the ability to convert money into physical form is severely curtailed, if not completely abolished. One is also struck by the curious proposition that physical cash has an opportunity cost in the form of the foregone interest on a risk-free investment, while digital cash will earn interest and therefore have no opportunity cost. That's page 398. In other words, cash does not yield anything, is therefore an inherently worse form of money than digital cash, which will earn interest comparable to T-bills. The good professors do not seem to recognize that they are contradicting themselves. Digital cash is preferable both because people earn interest on it and because it will allow for imposition of negative interest rates. They seem to think that money is just another financial asset, a more liquid one. Monetary policy therefore boils down to manage relative interest rates if only the spread between the interest on digital cash and financial assets can be maintained. There is no reason why people should not continue to be fully invested through a possible crisis. That's page 402. The problem is that money is not a financial asset and physical cash is not. Contra Bordeaux and Levin, Starro. Rather, holding cash serves as an important function, as Hoppy Lucy explains. Holding money is an investment in certainty. Since we can never know with complete certainty when and what we want to buy or at prices, we will be able to sell our goods and services. We always have some money on hand. The more settled and certain conditions are, the less cash reserves that people will think it necessary to keep. But in a financial crisis, uncertainty spikes again, and he will, therefore, increase his cash reserves to guard against this increased uncertainty until conditions quiet down again. Professors Bordeaux and Levin can perhaps be forgiven for not knowing to Hopp's argument, and perhaps even for ignorance of the work of the Hunt and Mises on which Hoppel built. But a recent newspaper from the Bank for International Settlements makes essentially the same point. Despite official hostility to cash and advances in payment technology, demand for cash has risen since the great financial crisis as people turn to cash as a store of value. Should there be a proposal be implemented, it's far from certain that the outcome in the event of a crisis will be what Professor Bordeaux and Levin desire. Physical cash will have been eliminated as a safe haven, but digital cash will be an inherently bad way of preserving purchase power when negative interest rates are threatened. A likely outcome will therefore be that savers look for alternatives to cash to preserve their wealth. One such alternative is investing in gold, An asset has a long track record of maintaining its value in the long term. Rather than securing the monetary system, the digital system outlined by Professor Bertelsen Levin would further empower central bankers at the expense of consumers. It's true. And I do have to agree, I invest in hard assets as well, and I have some people do the same thing. If you're going to use like digital cash and so forth, don't not leave everything in one area. Like, keep a few things handy, be resourceful, but your main assets should be hard assets. Because even in the United States, on a state level, it can be they can use gold and silver coins, okay, as a commodity. So those areas you should always keep in mind. For digital cash and so forth, don't get too crazy, because it's okay to use the enemy's tools. All right, that's what I believe in, because you never know. So best thing to do, be multitask in these areas, because you never know. If things happen, you have more of a cushion instead of hitting a hard rock floor. And that is it. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us through your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, if you sent something that's interesting, I want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondence with decorum. Furthermore, I'll leave all my footnotes, including social media sites and email addresses if you want to contact me. Alright, once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves, keep on spreading love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.